Let's bring in Srikanth Kondapalli, who joins me now from New Delhi. He's a professor of Chinese studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University. Good to have you on the show. So Dasha was just talking about this Chinese settlement plan. The officials from China are saying that President Xi Jinping's trip to Moscow is a peace mission. But when you look across the Atlantic, or not even across the Atlantic, the United States and European officials are saying that he's aiming to bolster ties with Vladimir Putin. Which one do you think is more likely?
I think although the statements were mainly in terms of the peace plan and negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, I think the predominant one is the Sino-Russian Strategic Cooperative Partnership, cobbled up in June 2001, continuing in various spheres. The Chinese central assessment is that the United States is a declining power. And the Ukrainian incident, they need to tackle this along with that of Russia. And so possibly they have given some sustenance to the Russian war on Ukraine, including drone technologies and Su-35 parts and others. This indicates that it is quite possible that China may graduate into a more lethal weapon transfer to Russia. In order to kind of weaken the NATO in its efforts in Ukraine. So this is quite a possibility because they have everything to gain by standing with Russia in contrast to the current efforts of the NATO.
Srikanth, obviously the West being a declining power was an idea that was really pushed by Mao Zedong many years ago. When it looks at this strategic partnership, I mean, back a year ago, on the eve of the invasion of Ukraine, Russia and China had declared sort of a quote, no limits friendship. Given that everything that has played out, do you still think that this still stands as it is?
Yes, in between there were some disappointments for China because it is reported at that time that President Putin told President Xi that he will finish the job of smashing Ukraine in about 3 days' time. However, it dragged on for so long, more than a year now, since February 24th last year. So that has led to some disappointment for the Chinese, specifically in terms of the Taiwan scenario. However, with the overall strategic situation, which is reflected in what the China and Russian leaders have just mentioned about the world order, international order, global governance issues rather than rule of law, and all others indicate that China is putting its eggs in Moscow's basket.
Since you mentioned the Taiwan issue, let me ask you about that. How are officials in Beijing, I mean, effectively, President Xi Jinping, looking at how the West, NATO, European Union, the United States are all reacting to Russia's conflict in Ukraine when it comes to assessing possible moves with Taiwan?
That is indeed the central point that the Chinese have been insisting on. In lieu of Russia occupying parts of Ukraine, China should also be given that kind of a thing in Taiwan Straits. So this is the deal between Russia and China. To a large extent, if you look at the Russia-China joint statements, even during the February 4th last year, the Russians for the first time mentioning about Taiwan in more explicit terms conducive to the Chinese position. That's number one. Number two, since the NATO is busy with the Ukrainian situation, much of the American attention is also focused on this theater. So the Chinese feel that they are relatively, more comfortable in the Taiwan Straits. If you look at the post Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan last August and the Chinese military exercises in 6 areas of Taiwan at the time, this indicates to their confidence in military operations across the straits.
Okay. Srikanth Kondapalli, thank you very much for joining us here on the NewsHour. Do appreciate it.